Scion by Zero Option. Hello, please, come in, sit down. You can set up your recorder on the end table beside you. Right, you all settled in there, Mr. James? I will admit, I was a bit taken aback by your request for an interview. I didn't think my exploits were that famous.
Well, Mr. Oak?
Please, call me Rowan.
Rowan Oak. Rather pretentious, but as you wish. You're not exactly famous in the way you understand it, but your exploits, as you call them, have caught the eye of several of the right people. They sent me to get your story, so please, just speak clearly into the mic so it gets a good pickup and you can begin your story and talk about whatever you wish. I'll endeavor to keep interruptions to a minimum, only if I need clarification. Think of it like Interview with the Vampire, but with fewer terrible fake accents.
I chuckle slightly at his joke as I nod in affirmation. Okay. Alright, well, let's see. My name is Rowan Oak. I was always fairly average, never got into much trouble, never went to church despite professing a Christian background. I grew up, played video games, went to college, pissed away 4 years on a business studies degree and partying. Yeah, I was your average millennial, bookish, naive, tech savvy. I met my wife Lily at work. She was the absolute center of my universe. Eyes the deepest cobalt blue, diminutive, and so sweet she could cause diabetes by proximity. It was awkward at first. You see, I've never really been good with women. I could never pick up on flirting or subtle clues. She was perfect for me, vocal, so I knew exactly what she desired at all times. Patient and caring. We married after a short time dating, and not long after, we were expecting our first child. My wife was just about as perfect as I could have hoped, and I could have lived in those moments forever. The company we worked for really had decent benefits. We both took parental at the same time. As time went on, for the first year, Lily couldn't stand the idea of our son going to daycare. The company even offered to let her work remotely to keep her. Her degree in statistical engineering was just too valuable to let go without an offer. We of course accepted because, well, I could never been able to say no to her. Our life was a little slice of American heaven. You could have even written a sappy 90s sitcom about us. When our son was 3, we got news that our second was coming and we were overjoyed. When we were at the hospital while Lily was in labor, life as I knew it would change irrevocably forever. I was in the commissary getting our son a snack when the whole world just stopped.
I'm sorry, stopped? Is that figuratively or literally, Mr. Oak?
Please, it's Rowan. And I meant literally. Coffee mid-pour defying gravity. The single fly stopped mid-flight in front of me. The whole works. I heard a voice all around me. It hurt my ears, and I wanted to cover him and scream, but I was too rooted in place. I couldn't move. It was everywhere, nowhere at once. It said to me, "Your faith will be tested. You have a destiny, a responsibility your Lord needs you to undertake. Heed our call and prepare yourself." Then I was bathed in a light so bright my senses were overwhelmed. Then darkness. I woke to the voices of my panicked family. According to doctors, I'd had a seizure and fell into a coma for 6 days. I had no idea what really happened, so I calmly assumed that the doctors were right and everything had been a hallucination brought on by the seizure. A few days later, my parents picked me up from the hospital and took me home to see my new son. The doctors had put me on some anti-seizure meds as a precaution. I thanked them, of course, and promised to monitor myself very carefully. At home, well, anyone who's had kids can tell you how a household with a precocious toddler and a newborn can be. We were certainly grateful for my parents' help while we got back on our respective feet. For weeks after my seizure, though, I was overcome with a series of strange compulsions. Specific thoughts kept intruding in my head. I figured them a side effect of the meds, but over the next 2 months they got harder and harder to ignore. I tried looking first for anyone online with similar side effects, but with no success. But the names, places, subjects all in my head yielded a plethora of information. A lot of it was bullshit, of course. Average 70s Satanist shit. It was strange to me because I had never had an interest in anything like that, and I hated horror movies. I only played D&D a few times as a teenager. And of course, I already mentioned I'm kind of not really a religious person. Yet this stuff was popping into my head with frightening clarity. I decided maybe I should go clear my head. So I hopped in our car and went for a drive. I drove for what I thought was aimlessly for over an hour until I wound up 3 towns over sitting outside a burnt-up old stone church. I turned off the car and went into the ruin, drawn by, well, really, I don't know what. I carefully and slowly walked to the pulpit and looked down. I felt like something was under the floorboards, but I couldn't pry them up. I went back to the car and retrieved the tire iron. Came back and pried the boards back up. Wrapped in leather, like some bad cliche, was an old book. I looked at the cover, but the 2 words, if that's what they were completely gibberish, and they seemed to be constantly shifting and changing. The meaning, though, was clear that they conveyed. It said, "Smiting Nephilim." It hurt my eyes to look at it. I wrapped it back up and left that church in a hurry, tossing it on the passenger seat. I checked my phone, and holy, 20 missed texts and calls from my very distraught wife. I called her. "Hi, sweetie. Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I took a drive to clear my head. I must have been in a dead spot." 7 hours? What? Really? I looked at the dash clock. I'd been there 7 hours? It felt like 10 minutes. "I'm so sorry, hon. I must have completely lost track of time. I'm coming home right now. I'm about 30 minutes away. I love you." The situation was all fucked up, so I resolved very quickly to see if I could find out anything about this book the next chance I got. My searches online held no answers, so I decided, why not see if an antique dealer or maybe a museum could tell me. Well, that was the first true test of my faith, it would seem. When I showed the book to several antique stores and even one museum curator, I got the same response. Is this some kind of joke? They all just saw a rotten, beaten-up leather book whose parchment pages had long shed their ink. Needless to say, I was severely doubting my mental state at this moment. I was losing time, seeing things, maybe that weren't even real. I threw the book back in the car and headed home dejected. Over the next couple of weeks, I did my best to ignore my compulsions, but I focused on my family, my work. It was hard, but they began to fade over time. Then came the dreams. Well, dreams I suppose is the wrong word. Absolute bowel-voiding nightmares. At first, just images, one after another. Their meaning, well, kind of beyond grasp. Fire, violence, a singular demon. I awoke abruptly. Lily stirred beside me and asked if I was okay. I responded that I just needed a glass of water and I'd be back in a few minutes. I grabbed a glass of water and headed into the garage where the book sat. I sighed and went to toss it in the bin when I stopped and opened it one more time. On the first page was the demon from my dream. The image seemed almost animated, I thought. This gray and purple mottled skin shifting, eyes and mouths fading in and out all over its body, 8 spindly arms from its torso, and its torso, split from its navel to where its head should have been, a giant gaping tentacled toothed maw. As I looked at the image, I shivered and continued to read. The Hamadryax assumes the shape of a human soul it consumes. Banishment requires the carving of the demon's true name onto its heart. Then a series of glyphs appeared on the pages. Then a voice. "Do you understand?" I still didn't. As I looked around, I was startled to see a light in the small mirror on the wall where none should be. It spoke. "We're forbidden from directly interfering. This book is the last of the Sanctus Angelus, a living relic whose purpose is to locate and instruct on how to kill demons who escape hell and feed on human souls. You are the book's chosen hand. It is a terrible burden, but only the incorruptible can truly see its form. The book has shown you one nearby. Listen to it. It will guide you, protect you. The others have been destroyed or killed over time. This one is the last. If it is lost, nothing will be able to stop the corruption of Earth, and will be forced to begin it all again. For this burden, I am truly sorry. It is not fair, but life rarely is. Be cautious, and we will guide you as much as we can." I was floored, at a complete loss. I crawled back into bed, but I didn't sleep a wink that night as the words kept crawling through my head. Driving to work the next day, I made it to the end of the block when I stopped. Miss Kwan was in her garage with the door open when I really saw her true form. My heart beat at 1,000,000 miles an hour. I pulled the car around the block and turned it off. Pulling the book from my work bag, I looked at the pages again. Convinced, I got out and walked over to her house as she wandered inside. I snuck in after her. I didn't even get the door closed behind me when I was thrown straight into the ceiling. I was in over my head was all I could think as I was thrown clear across the room. You thought I couldn't smell your stink, Scion. I'm going to consume your soul. Then that lovely family, one by one. Then I'm going to present that relic to Samael for my real reward. No, you won't, you fucking freak show. I had no idea where this bravado was coming from, but I leaned into it. I grabbed the kitchen knife off the counter as Miss Kwan began to transform before my eyes. Her arms were splitting and warping and elongating. Her head was collapsing as her mouth ripped her torso open. Here was my chance, I thought. Mid-transformation, I plunged the knife into her heart. The scream felt like it would shatter reality. I worked quickly to stab again and again. It was sloppy, but I eventually managed to carve its true name into its heart. As the last glyph was carved into it, it burst into flames, and the body left behind was just nothing more than a twisted parody of a human form. A desiccated husk. In a rush, I left quickly. I felt so alive, so powerful. Even with the beating I just took, not a single bruise marked my body. Then, the panic set in. What the hell had I just done? Surely someone had heard all that, the screaming, the smashing, the yelling. But no sirens, no accusing looks or anything following my departure. No news stories. I was relieved and terrified in equal measure. I tried to lay low, but with difficulty. I dreaded every knock, fearing repercussions. When it seemed okay, I breathed a sigh of relief. Maybe this was all true. For a little over a year, I worked like that, dispatching demons. From simple soldiers to one greater demon that was feeding on the souls of an entire school of children. The book always held true, guiding, protecting, keeping our mission from being discovered. But eventually, I think my efforts finally caught the wrong kind of attention.
You mean the human authorities?
No, I mean hell's worst. I was always careful to put warding glyphs on my kids' clothes, jewelry, my family, to keep them hidden and safe. I don't know how they found my wife, but I was out with the kids when I felt something was deeply wrong. A real compulsion. I dropped them off with my parents and headed home. I reached for the book, but it was blank. I thought to myself, you've got to be kidding me. Why now? I went inside the house and called Lily's name. Nothing. I searched the house and nothing. Nothing on the first floor, but Lily's wedding band was on the bedroom table. She never took it off. My heart sank as I heard a creak in the floorboards behind me. I turned to face with tears in my eyes what used to be my wife. The chimera was splitting and folding her flesh like a tesseract, fingers, arms, and eyes reaching out, blinking, folding back in on themselves. Scion, I hope you enjoyed her like I did. I roared and attacked. Chimeras were fast, but the space was confined. I quickly subdued it and stabbed. I began carving the chimera's name very slowly into its heart. As I finished, it whispered, "Got you now." As its body turned to ash. Where the hell was Lily's body? There was always a desiccated corpse afterwards. As I stood there wondering, the police had kicked in my door. Turns out, the chimera had strung her up in the basement. The coroner said it likely took hours for her to die. My trial didn't last long. The evidence pointing to me wasn't enough overly to convict.
The book didn't help you, like it promised? Didn't hide you?
It doesn't work that way. Besides, the book is gone. It disappeared after the police arrived.
You know what? I think I've heard enough for now. I should go.
Oh, okay then. I'll be seeing you, Mr. James.
I doubt it, but okay.
Mr. Oakes, it's time for your meds. Who are you talking to? I looked over to where Mr. James was, and now wasn't. No one, I guess. Okay then. Well, you take your meds. It's bedtime. A few minutes later, on his way out, as Mr. James got into his car, he pulled out his phone and made a call.
Lord, the book is gone. The Scion has fallen. We're gonna have to start all over.
A long blade began to protrude from his chest as the phone was pulled from his hand. I'm going to make you pay, Samael. I'm going to start with your son, Memnon, here. So I suggest you say your goodbyes. For I am her vengeance, saith the Lord. As Mr. Oak began carving Lily's name on Memnon's heart right before his own.